80 years ago, in 1942, my grandfather was 17 with a gun in his hand. 80 years later, in 2022, I too am 17 and am fortunate enough to be holding a pencil in my hand. We all fight our own battles. My grandfather fought his in Europe during World War II. I fight mine in school and beyond, striving to educate myself and others so that we can live in a world where we can resort to pens instead of weapons, words instead of swords. Hi, my name is Sela Masaki. I am Gosei and I live with my family in St. Louis, Missouri. In addition to being Japanese American, I am Jewish, queer, and a big fan of Batman cartoons. I have been given the honor of speaking to you all today about my grandfather, who served in the 100th Infantry Battalion, and the impact of his legacy on my life. My grandpa, Tomoki Masaki, was boarding at Mid-Pacific Institute in Honolulu when he and his classmates heard sirens. At first, they thought nothing of it, for they were used to hearing drill sirens from Pearl Harbor nearby. However, after climbing out the window and onto the roof, Grandpa and his classmates saw the planes pull up over the school. And on the underside of the wings, they saw a big red circle. And it was at that moment that they knew that this was not a drill. This was war. The next day, Grandpa went and enlisted, even though he was only 17. He would go on to fight in Italy and France with the 100th. I know that story like the back of my hand. That's how many times I've heard and retold it. But I never got to meet the man himself. He died when I was a young child. And he never really talked about the war with my dad. I'll never know what Grandpa's own reasoning was for enlisting. All I have are these distant memories of a person who stands alone on a pillar of history. That's all I used to see him as, really. This distant family member who gave me a cool story to tell. Nothing else, nothing more. Lately, however, I've been thinking about my relationship with my grandfather and how the parallels of our lives converge. Who was he? What did he stand for? Why did he fight for a country that imprisoned his own people? What was his truth? And how did he live it? Well, Dad says that Grandpa and I share an intergenerational stubbornness. When he and I set our minds to something, it'll probably take the end of the world to change our minds. Grandpa set his mind to serving his country and standing by his people. Even in the face of terrible racism and fear, still, Grandpa stood by his Japanese American identity. In the middle of nowhere, Missouri, the majority white population doesn't typically understand my multicultural and multidimensional background. Speaking about my identities is an active choice I've made in order to celebrate that part of myself, that part of my truth. As many of you know, high school can suck. There have been many times when I have been bullied for being Japanese American, for being Jewish, and for being queer. On those days, I come home and I ask my parents or my sibling for a hug. And sometimes I cry because it is so unbelievably hard to be loud and proud me every day. I mean, just this past week, several people decided to make me their punching bag and talked smack about me behind my back. In this situation, I have two choices: say something or walk away. I made my choice. I spoke up to them for myself and confronted their fear. Grandpa made his choice. He voluntarily enlisted, even though he didn't have to or was expected to. When faced with a challenge, both Grandpa and I decide to meet it head on. Another part of my truth is working against misinformation. As a practicing Reformed Jew, I and other Jewish teens go to local Christian schools and educate others about Jewish practices and beliefs. We do this in order to create bridges between communities and in order to combat fear and anti-Semitism. Because we as Jews need police protection in our sacred spaces so that we can worship safely, this cross-community youth work is vital now more than ever. When I do this work, I celebrate another part of myself, another part of my heritage that allows me to live my truth with purpose. In St. Louis, there are very few Japanese Americans, mostly older Japanese or Japanese nationals. I'm so used to being culturally alone that I don't know how I'm supposed to be Japanese American. There's no mold to follow, no example to look at. And yes, I know there's no right way to be Japanese American, but it's hard when you're seen as the token JA and you already don't feel like you belong. When Go for Broke National Education Center came to my high school, suddenly I wasn't alone in my Japanese American experience. I was able to speak to my class about Grandpa in the 100th 442nd, giving me the opportunity to show that history is not in the distant black and white past that we tend to dismiss it as. And since then, I've been working with Go For Broke and speaking about my experience as a Japanese American. And it's changed my life. I've been using my voice, as I am right now, to speak my truth. Grandpa opened a door for me. Now, I know what it's like to be part of a Japanese American community, and I've never felt more at home. Today, we honor the monument that bears the names of the Japanese Americans who served during World War II. My family didn't even know that there was a monument until I found the name locator on Go For Broke's website. And sure enough, there was Grandpa, panel 3A, row 39. When I ran to show my dad, he began to cry. Today, we celebrate all the people like Grandpa who, in a moment of national and international strife, stayed true to who they were. They are an example and inspiration not only to Japanese Americans, but to all of us. When I live like my truest self, I feel the most like Grandpa. When I stand by who I am, I honor my ancestors who came before me. I honor Grandpa, who refused to sit idly by when his truth was called into question. I stay resilient in the face of adversity and discrimination, just like he did. I learned all of these lessons from a man whom I never met, and yet he still lives on in me in the things that I do and advocate for. Okage-sama de. Because of Grandpa, I can stand on my own pillar in the place of history. Because of Grandpa, after 80 years, I can live my truth.